Hey everyone, it's another video, and as you can see I have finished painting Malagast and I'm really happy with him. It turned out great. As I said in the first video, Sons of Horus is something I've tried a few times and I've never got the feel or the look I wanted. And I feel in this model, yeah, this is what I wanted it to be like. This is kind of my take on grimdark, or about as grimdark as I'll get, basically. So it's still got my highlights and things that I like to do for the armor panels, but I've tried to keep it quite subdued in a way, little bits of battle damage, things like that. Anyway, hopefully you like how this model came out, and I think it suits the character. In the first two videos we did the armor and the face, so just kind of two main big details, but this one we're going to basically finish everything else. So the thing I'm most happy with, I think, is the gold, how the banner came out, and yeah, I'm really happy with that. So I'm looking forward to sharing that recipe, a different gold I've done before, and I would definitely use this gold if I was going to do a Sons of Horus army, which I'm really tempted to do. And then we put quite a lot of effort into the leather elements, like the kind of wrist cuffs and the cloth in the center. And then actually after that, all the little details are super easy. So it's kind of like picking and choosing your battles. So I put the most effort into the green armor and face, followed by the leather and gold, but I didn't put quite as much effort into. And the little bits of silver and small details everywhere I did in a very simple way, which you'll see using just a little bit of dry brushing and then washing. So I hope you can see that I've painted this character to look really nice in an army, but I have kind of skimped on certain areas, so it saved me a little bit of time. So yeah, I guess for me this would be a very high level character within an army, and I'm actually thinking about doing some more Sons of Horus videos just because I love doing this so much. So I'd like to do a vehicle and then maybe just a normal trooper, because that could help you out, especially since it's looking like we're going to get a Horus Heresy box that has Sons of Horus in, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. Anyway, let's get on and finish this model. We're going to start out this model by highlighting all the black elements, and some of them will get slightly different treatment, but we're going to start all of the black elements by highlighting with German grey. I normally use dark grey from Vallejo for this, but I ran out of that, and I had this German grey from AK, so I thought I would give it a go. It's just a really standard, nice dark grey, so a perfect first highlight for any black. All you need to do really is look at where the highlights are on the green and follow those. So where you've got the bright green, this is where this dark grey highlight should be. So on this shin armour, I do a nice big chunky highlight following the green section. Also bear in mind the light source you've chosen. So mine's coming from upper left, because we can see that by the bright highlight on the top of the pipe, the knee and the face, of course. So just bear that in mind the whole time. You can see here on the pipe I'm doing a secondary highlight, which is just going to be a little bit of a smaller one, but the main bright highlight will be on the left side here. The difficult thing with black is judging the amount of contrast, because we could go up to pure white or whatever to make a shiny looking black, but I want this to be, quite a dark model. So for me personally, I'm trying to rein it back in on the highlights and not go too bright. I don't want this to be a shiny space marine. I like to paint with a light source, rendering the shapes so they look cool, but I don't want to take this one too far, like a pristine ultramarine or something like that. So the next highlight I do is German grey mixed with neutral grey, and this is probably going to be enough for sort of the main volumes, so the big highlights across the shin and things like that. And if I go any brighter, that will probably just be for edge highlights and stuff. On the pipes, on the torso, I'm putting more light on the one in the center, because I think I want that to be like a shinier kind of black, so I might make that a bit more high contrast. And then the two either side, I think I'll put some washes and make them a bit rusty. So you can play with different contrasts of black throughout the kind of whole mini, really. It's not quite dry brushing. I think some people call it over brushing, but basically I have very little paint on the brush, but it's quite diluted, so it's not going to go on thick like a dry brush straight out the pot. And I just very carefully and softly go over details like this piping. And it's kind of the same approach as when you use the side of the brush to catch edge highlights and stuff. So yeah, I think when you've got details like these pipes that are quite tricky, you can start off with those soft kind of brush strokes. If it was a golden demon piece, then I would paint each individual part of the pipe perfectly with the tip of my brush. But for this, I just want to quickly get some light on there, so this way is fine. I do some highlights with neutral grey on its own, and then I start to add in some pale blue from Vallejo. And I know that I don't want to go up to pure pale blue for many parts, maybe just this pipe. So that's how I'm going to make sure I don't put in too much contrast. We don't want the black to overpower the green, so I still want to make sure those highlights on the green, especially on the knee and the thigh, they're kind of taking center stage. We want to draw most of the focus to the face, followed by the green, and then the black details need to match the highlighting in terms of the intensity on each part and the volumes, but we don't want them to take over and stuff. So I finish with a couple very small highlights on this main pipe with pale blue, and I do a couple little edge highlights as well. So the edge highlights need to vary. So where there's bright light on the green, the edge highlight on the black, that needs to be brighter on that part. This helps to sell your light source, sell it all together. So when you do an edge highlight, don't make sure that every edge is the same brightness. That needs to vary just like your transition. I also decided much later on to paint the gun barrel in black in the same method, which is why you can see it's kind of finished here. But I thought that would be better than the normal kind of silver we do. Well, I do on gun barrels. So I'm going to try and start painting these black so it looks a bit stealthier. I keep all my metallics in a separate box off my desk because I don't use them that often, but I'm starting to use them a lot more, so maybe they'll get a place on my desk if they're lucky. But anyway, I'm rummaging through my box here because I wanted to use a recipe I hadn't used recently, basically. I'd used the light bronze from Pro Acryl for the last two things, so I wanted to do a different colour. I narrowed it down to a few, so you can see it's mostly scale 75 colours, and I picked these up because they're a bit easier to get a hold of. And I got a couple of these dark star paints too. I quickly blue tacked off the green I'd painted on the arm. I'm going to spray the banner with the airbrush because there's so much gold. So yeah, I just needed a quick blue tack on this part. We're going to start by base coating in Henry's signature colour, Decayed Metal from Scale 75. And it is just the perfect shadow for most golds. It's really dark, not overly shiny. I absolutely love it. I've been using it for years, and there's just nothing quite like Decayed Metal at the moment. Now, the key to making this gold look great, or well, what made me happy, was using this Peridot Alchemy from Scale 75. It's very greenish kind of gold, and it just looks amazing, to be honest. So this was the most important colour to get. There isn't any other brand that makes one like it, so I can't recommend an equivalent, but I really recommend it. It's fantastic. And I'm using the airbrush because you get a nicer finish, I think. And because this icon was so large, I wanted a perfect flat metallic finish. So I'm just spraying the Peridot Alchemy, and I'm trying to match the light direction that's on the face. So it's kind of coming from upper left. So we're kind of catching all the areas on the upper side of this banner, but we're focusing and making it slightly brighter towards those tops from the left. We're going to enhance this now with the brush, and I start off with a very thin highlight of Peridot Alchemy again. So even though I airbrush that colour, because when we brush it on, it will basically be stronger. So it's a nice way to make sure you get your transition from airbrushed to non-airbrush colours to first paint on your previous colour you've airbrushed. I hope that makes sense. That was quite a mouthful. So anyway, whatever you've sprayed on with the airbrush, brush on a little bit of that colour, and then you can make sure it's opaque and powerful enough, and then you can move on to a brighter tone and you know it will transition to it well. That was a better way of saying it. I also edge highlighted the shadow areas with this color, so that was like a soft highlight for every section done after that. So I decided to use Darkstar Silver and add a little bit of that to the Peridot Alchemy to make it brighter. You could use any silver, I think, but the Darkstar one is cool because it's almost white and it's super thick, so it means that you get a lot of power out of it. Some are a little bit watery, so yeah, this is a great paint. They are trickier than other brands to get hold of, so don't stress about it. But if you see Darkstar paints on a store, then try them out. They're really, really cool. So I just use this mix to make, edge highlights slightly brighter where I need them, and I really bring the highlight on the icon to like a fine area and get lots of contrast. Again, going from that specific light direction. If you're like me and your decayed metal has been sat around for a while without being used, it actually separates quite badly. But what I discovered is the liquid that kind of separates from the metallic is this really dark brown kind of inky stuff. And this actually makes a fantastic glaze to shade your golds. So it's kind of tricky because if you've recently shook your pot up, you're not going to be able to do this. But next time you haven't used it in a while, or maybe you've bought a brand new one, just try a little bit out of this and it's amazing to shadow stuff. So you can see I'm using it here as a glaze, pushing this kind of very translucent dark brown stuff to shadow and enhance stuff where I want. But the reason it's so great is because it's kind of got a nice sheen to it, but it's not super metallic. I don't know. Hopefully you can see from the video footage that it just goes on really, really smooth. It's really great, to be honest. I imagine you could get the same effect from some normal dark ink, but because I've sprayed decayed metal as the shadow, this kind of just works. So yeah, I'll see if I can find a way of separating it and making this magic shadow glaze. But I hope you find this tip useful and interesting at the very least, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. After those bright highlights and those dark shadows, we've got loads of contrast on the banner now, so it's looking really awesome. So I want to block in the other areas like the chains just to see what it's looking like. So I'm going to use Vallejo Metal Color Gunmetal. We love that one here on Cult of Paint, and that just goes straight out the pot, and you can put that on the chains and all the other metal parts on Malagas too, actually. I knew I wanted this to have patina or verdigris, and one of my favourite recipes is Despair Green from Scale 75 because it's very translucent, and also Caribbean Blue, it's just the right colour. So mixing these two together, diluting them with a lot of water makes a fantastic translucent kind of glaze that you can use to build up verdigris effects. And start off dark and just keep adding Caribbean Blue, and then you can get this kind of effect. I actually really want to try this with oil paints. I've done it with oil paints and it's fantastic, but I haven't found an oil paint that is as good as this colour. But Henry used those ones on the skeletons, so I'm going to pick those up and see if I like those too. So yeah, if you've got turquoise oil paints, I reckon go for that. But if you've got acrylics, this turns out great every time. So I'm quite reserved with it and just see how it looks, and I add a little bit more Caribbean Blue. Always use it really diluted so you can see the gold coming through, but you can build up nice little patchy sections and see how extreme you want to take it. It's also, because it's so diluted, it works as a wash quite nicely, so you can run it into those details like on the top of the icon here. So yeah, it's very versatile, have fun with it. Tried really hard to think of a colour that would be nice for these tassels that wasn't purple, because I know you guys keep poking fun at me for using purple all the time, but it was just the right colour for this one. So I did Baraknar Burgundy, another favourite here on the channel, but at least this was a very subdued and dark purple, so I tried. And to make it a little more grim dark than I'm used to, I just did a very light wash of black. And I used that for the chains as well. So just a normal matte black to darken everything up, and that will kill the colour, keeping it desaturated. I then reapplied the Baraknar Burgundy just to tidy it up, And I did a final highlight with just a touch of white added. So I didn't go crazy on this part. I didn't want it to draw attention. So really it's just about getting the color correct, not being overpowering, and just having a little bit of detail on it for me. So we have to paint some gold elements on the model now. Obviously I can't airbrush those because I don't want to mask it off or whatever. So we're going to paint these by hand with the same recipe. And I guess that's good news if you're not airbrushing, because you can definitely achieve a great gold without the airbrush. I really like the look of airbrush metallics. So we're just base coating everything with decayed metal here. So then we highlight with the Peridot Alchemy, and it's really hard to blend metallics. So my advice is try not to, just get the highlights in the right place and the right shape. I actually use a few little scratches and dots to kind of blend it in. It's almost like stippling, and it definitely softens the kind of transition as opposed to trying to get a perfect blend. And yeah, I just think this is the way to do metallics. Try and let the metallics do the work. If you try and blend them perfectly, I don't think it's really worth the effort. Put your focus into applying them smoothly, cleanly, with a perfect shape. I was actually really happy with how they turned out being brushed on, and definitely a few little scratches and a more kind of tatty looking gold was more forgiving, and yeah, I love the look of it. These metallics are just fantastic, to be honest. You really don't need to do a lot with them, just put them on and I think they look amazing. And we finish by adding that wonderful silver again and just doing some very small little light highlights, just little dots and catches, and it will really make them pop. But be very reserved with this because it's very bright and powerful, and we don't want these metallics to outshine literally the other elements. I've run out of kind of medium silvers, so I had to make a mix of my very bright white silver with the dark gunmetal to just get that kind of, well, medium silver. But I'm sure that you've got something that works, and we're just going to start highlighting the chains on the banner now and all the other silver elements too. With the chain links, you just need to add a little dot of silver at the top of each one and the direction that the light source is hitting. So you want these chains to be quite dull, so just a subtle highlight for detail, and I think that's enough. There's a lot of little details on this model, like this, I don't know, device telling him how alive he is. It's probably something in the story that I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of details like this, and you could spend forever doing them perfectly. I'm just going to very carefully kind of battle damage the edges with silver. So it's just a super careful dry brush basically. So I'm imagining it was black and it's just chipped silver on the edge, and then later I'll just do some oils and get it dusty, but for me I don't think it needs any more. Like I said at the beginning, I want to put more time into some details, but I do need to save time on others because although this is a very high level in my opinion, I still want this to be army possible. You know, I've got these dreams of doing an army and it needs to be possible basically. When I got to this point, I thought, yeah, I need to glue the banner on now because, yeah, it's just the right time. I want to paint the leather and I want it to be in the right position to get the lighting correct. So now the banner's been sprayed, then yeah, it's absolutely fine to stick this on. These little leather wrist cuffs were one of my favourite things to paint, and they were base coated with Rhinox hide. And then the first highlight is going to be a mix of Rhinox hide and Gobi brown. You've seen me do this loads of times before, but yeah, it's just awesome for leather. So I'm just painting those folds at the top, and then on the large area I do a very broad highlight. Because this is leather, we need a soft highlight, so it needs to be wide, but I paint this with a lot of texture. So it's going to have lots of brush strokes and stippling, and it's very forgiving and just super enjoyable to paint, so I absolutely love doing this. I leave a little bit of shadow, and then I come on the other side here and I just do a little rough highlight mark down the other side too. Actually, I really like this shot here because when it's dried you can see how rough I've been. So there's loads of texture and it's not really blended, and I actually love that look. So just building up here with Gobi brown, and then we're adding a little bit of buff to that to get a kind of yellowish look. And again, just building it up with lots of rough brush marks. And I don't know why, I just absolutely love the look of this, especially compared to the slightly smoother armor. I think it's great. I always look forward to doing leather elements because, yeah, they're just so forgiving. So here I've added a bit of the buff colour, which I mentioned earlier, the yellow, and I'm doing some much finer marks now because it's quite bright. And this is just to add texture in that kind of highlight section. So here it's just a mix of small lines and dots. Just have a look at some leather and try and come up with something you think looks realistic. Now, to tie this all together, just do some little glazes of Rhinox hide, and this just blurs the edge slightly, but you can still see that texture underneath. And it also has a very nice satin finish, so you get more contrast again. The other cloth I started with the same base coat, Rhinox and Gobi, but this didn't turn out well, so the captions are going to be what I think you should do, because I basically repainted it this way in the end. So we're going to use olive drab here instead of Rhinox hide, and that's just going to make it a slightly greener tone, and then just build up with the same Gobi brown but a different highlight with deck tan. So here I'm kind of building up the highlights. It's sped up a bit, and yeah, this was just not a waste of time, but I wish I picked some different colors. So you can see where I'm placing the highlights, but I would follow the paints that I'm using in the caption. And yeah, the olive drab color is fantastic, and it will contrast better to the wrist cuffs. I think that's the mistake I made. In this clip, you can see me glazing, which is basically to replace the color. So this is using the olive drab and Gobi brown that I suggest you should layer up with. And I just had to kind of do quite a few glazes to change the tone, which meant I didn't have to completely repaint it, but like I said, this is what I wish I went for. And you can see already it's just a nice contrast against the other leather elements that we have on the wrists. And I build up the highlights with deck tan, which is different to buff. Buff is quite yellow, whereas deck tan is very neutral. So we're just slightly separating these two elements. Both have got a little bit of Gobi brown in, which kind of ties them together. But, you know, the different base tone with the olive drab, which is green, and then the more neutral deck tan, that will separate these elements, but they're still not going to take any attention away from our green or skin. So that's two very dull but very nice leather recipes. The final highlights on this are deck tan, but it still has a little bit of Gobi brown in. I found pure deck tan was too bright and it took away from the cloth, so just keep a little bit of Gobi brown in there, but try to do lots of very small marks, scratches, highlights in the right places, again to give that nice texture. I couldn't find my oil paints, so I thought I'd give these enamels a try, but actually what I prefer is oils. So I managed to order some and get them after painting, and this burnt sienna for rust and burnt umber for grime is fantastic. So I just dilute that with a little bit of sans odor, and we're going to use that to wash all the rivets and stuff like that. The reason oils and enamels are so good is because you can control how translucent they are and you can change them, and so they're just much easier to control over the top of your effects you've done already. Basically, it allows you to get a lot more subtlety into your rust and things like that. So if you haven't tried them before, I really, really recommend it. It makes doing like rusty bits over this green armor less scary because you can just wipe them away with the spirits. So if you haven't tried it before, please do. It's so fun and forgiving. I used it quite liberally but very diluted, basically over any boring elements, so it's a bit like cheating, but wherever I've got some fairly plain black areas, I just wash some of this over, and then when it dries, it will just lighten up all the cracks and the details, and it basically means we're going to make things look interesting and corroded with very little effort, which is especially useful when you have so many kind of details like this out the back. Just a little bit of a light wash and I think it looks cool. It's quite nice on all the piping where it kind of hugs the recesses and you have silver on the outside, and then in all those recesses just a little bit of orangey rust, so nice and subtle but awesome. So I stuck my model down onto the base, and you'll notice I went for the gaming base, which is interesting, wanting to keep my options open. I'm probably dreaming, but anyway, I recommend gluing the sand down and actually not painting it with primer, because you can make use of the kind of the different colors in the sand. And we paint over the top of it, but quite translucent paint, so a little bit of that sand kind of comes through. So I'm using a grey, which is just neutral grey, but we need to make it more natural looking and add some brown to it. So I just stick a little bit of olive drab in it, but basically if you just add any brown to grey, it's going to make your groundwork and your rocks look more natural. So just build that up over here. I obviously need it to be a bit more opaque over the milliput areas because we don't want the yellow coming through. So to lighten the base, I added a tiny bit of deck tan to my previous mix of neutral grey and olive drab. And I don't want a lot of contrast here, so I just added a little bit of deck tan at a time. And all I want to do really is on the rocks, paint the flat or the horizontal areas lighter than the vertical parts. So just separate those two angles on the rock. And you can build up some texture with lots of brush marks on the rock as you go. And also do a little bit of dry brushing on the sand. So just gradually add some deck tan, add texture, add marks, and just build up until you've got what you think is enough contrast, but try not to go too over the top with this. I tried out some Scale 75 Burnt Umber, which is a really cool paint actually. I diluted it a lot and just did a little bit of glazing to tie some of the elements together, darken the rocks. So yeah, really diluted and just subtly add a little more tone into this. I think I added too much deck tan and it just became a little bit lifeless. After that glaze had dried, actually I think it looks really great. So it's a very boring colour, but that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be very pale, but obviously boring. We don't want it pale and bright because otherwise we're just going to draw attention. But now I finish it with some weathering powder, and I just picked up some new weathering powders as I wanted some different colours, and this light slate grey was absolutely perfect. Like I said, we want some grey with a bit of brown in, which is what this is, and all I do with my weathering powders on bases is add small dots and really work them into the base. You don't need to seal them, just really work them in with the brush and they will stay there. I find if you seal them it dulls the colour and makes them spread, so this is how I like to do my bases, and it's so matte that it makes it look really natural very easily. So this again is something I thought, yeah, this will be a suitable base for my gaming stuff, so it had to be easy, and this weathering powder is the key. And with the rim painted black, always got to be black on the rim, that's it done. I didn't show you every single detail because there's so many and I think you can work that out for yourself. Things like the rope that wrap around the bolt gun, that was just the same recipe as the crotch cloth and stuff like that. And there's lots of little elements that if you wanted to, you could add more detail to, especially around the back. But I'm really happy with how this model looks. I'm happy with it because I always think my stuff looks a little bit too bright in terms of the colours, but this for me is just right because it's still got the heavy light source that I like to paint with, but it's weathered, it's a little more subdued, so I'm happy that I finally managed to rein it in a little bit. I'd be interested to see if you think, oh yeah, this is a little bit of a style change from you, or if you're like, this is how your stuff always looks, you idiot, like what are you talking about? But for me, it's slightly more towards grim dark than my usual happy purple elves that I still love. In this video, I'm most happy with the gold. I love that peridot alchemy. It's such a cool color, but I'm really happy with the shading we did, and I'm really happy with the patina. Just that combination of all those little things makes a really nice looking gold, and I'm happy with the highlighting. I think it's quite easy to read, so definitely a recipe I'll use in other stuff. I'm not using peridot alchemy enough, so that's going to happen. I'm also really happy how the wrist cuff looks. Loads of texture. It didn't take very long, and I think it just looks really cool. It's actually, it's next to the head and he's holding his wrist up, so there's actually quite a bit of focus on that. So when you look at it or pay attention to it, I think it's important that it looks great. I hope you can see that I did some details really simple, like just a little dry brush of silver and a little wash with oil paint. And that's where, I tried to save time. We don't need to put loads of time into every element, but doing some parts, the important parts, really well, overall, the model will look cool. And for me, that's how you should do a character in an army. It was so nice to paint something Heresy again. I think this sculpt's fantastic, especially the face. It's nice to have a modern, crisp cast as well. That made a difference. So I really do hope that we get some more Sons of Horus and Heresy sort of comes back to life. And if I do a Legion, it has to be Sons of Horus because they're one of my biggest failures back in the day when I just couldn't pull off the Sons of Horus. So I'm thinking about doing a dreadnought, so if you're interested in me showing you how to do a vehicle, then I would like to do that. Maybe even, a contempt dreadnought or something like that. And if we get some new Heresy models, then I will do some more Sons of Horus. But anyway, leave your thoughts in the comments and let me know which details you liked best. And I look forward to the next video and hopefully more Sons of Horus in the future. See you then.